Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor. I was going to say baby metal fan, which is still true, but you know, I have it's a little broader than that. Has become broader, particularly in the last 6 months or so. That I'm interested in a lot of Japanese music, and today I'm going to talk about these guys, Atarashii Gakko no leaders, or just Atarashii Gakko, and their single that came out in January 999, which I'm sure you have heard if you're here. And it's interesting because it exists in a number of different versions, which we'll talk about. And part of what I want to talk about today is their connections to punk. Not so much through the sound of the music itself, but through what the music represents, what they represent. So I hope you find it interesting. I'm going to pause it there. I'm going to break this up as we go. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking simply about lyrics because there are so many versions of this now which have lyrics built into them. So you can see the official version, and most of the translation seems to me pretty good. This starts with Narita Karasuga ni Akiba. So from going from Narita to Akiba. Narita is in Chiba. It's a city sort of distinct from Tokyo, but it's also the home of the major Tokyo International Airport, of course, Narita Airport. Akiba is an abbreviation, as I understand it, of Akihabara, which is an area of Tokyo which is particularly associated with electronics, right? It's where you go to buy all kinds of electronic gear. It has been like that since the 80s, and actually earlier, I think. It's also home to a lot of popular culture stuff to do with manga and gaming and anime. So, you know, right from the start, the song is positioning the world of the song, the world of the band, as specifically Tokyo driven and specifically about youth culture, right? Which is frequently what they're singing about. I am like not their target demographic by a long way, and that's fine. And most of what their energy is about, which is what I'm going to talk about later on, is about being, you know, a young person in Japan. And the question, you know, what are you searching for? You going into this downtown area and struggling to find a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, and you're bored, but also this sense of thank you for your concern, but I'm not. It's not your business. The sense of isolation and disconnection. And as we see going to the next part, you know, my future prospect list is a blank. That teacher who shows up in that other video that I showed a little bit of before, which is about being lost, and about that sense of being lost, which is not just a young person's thing, but also an old person's thing, that they have learned to deal with it, or to get used to it, or to accept it. They're resigned to feeling purposeless and disconnected. And the young people, which is what the song is about, are not. But there is that sense of frustration with, you know, your current prospects, the lack of any kind of clear future, which is okay, right? That one of the things that they often talk about is that being lost is not a bad thing. You should always feel lost because it's where you find creativity. It's where you find a sense of purpose. If everything is set for you and you're on a clear track, then you lose any kind of real agency and you just become a cog in the machine. So yeah, and the reference to excitement about getting some buzz on your TikTok account. Of course, TikTok is big in Japan, bigger perhaps than it is here. And the band have been doing a lot of sort of little mini promo TikTok videos along with YouTube and Twitter stuff to try and sort of raise their profile, I think. But that sense that we are driven by a sense of public recognition, of people acknowledging you, not so much in person, but for your electronic footprint, is both a positive and a negative, I think, in the song. Oh yeah, you can change the mask, but where I belong is not here, it's nowhere. And the mask thing, I think is interesting. It's reminiscent of an old XTC song. Where the point is that the masks that the youth get to wear are manufactured by somebody else, right? That there's a sort of corporate production of youth culture. It's not generated by the youth culture, and it doesn't finally really manifest them. It's something merely that you get to put on for a while, and then trade it in. And the XTC song says, "There's no youth culture, only masks we let you rent." You know, it's not yours. It doesn't belong to you. It's a corporate product. And I think part of what, the song is about is an awareness of that, of the sort of the inorganic, synthetic, corporate nature of a lot of what passes for youth culture, and an attempt to kind of reclaim it. But in the process, recognizing that you are somehow cut off, disconnected, and not part of a clear sense of community, and not fully in control of your own purpose and identity, right? It's a very nihilistic song, like the XTC song Travels in Nihilon, which I was just referring to. It's about trying to find meaning, trying to create meaning for your own life in a world that is frequently offering you trivial, stupid things as a marker of purpose and identity. And that may include TikTok. It may include, other aspects of popular culture that are finally kind of disposable and not important. Okay, so this is so Atarashii Gakko. So the first part about the guy, Kakuine, so you're cool, you're hot, cool and hot simultaneously, and you made me do a double take because you're tall, and then kudaran, which means it's pointless, it's stupid, right? And I think what they're saying. I think that the implication is that it's twofold, right? That on the one hand, it's pointless going after the really tall, hot guy who's not interested in you because he's tall and hot. But also because the fact of being fascinated by the tall hotness is itself stupid, right? As the next part says, we're fascinated by somebody's big boobs. And again, it's pointless and stupid because you don't have them. Therefore, it's not something that it's productive to be jealous about. I guess you can have surgery. But the other thing is that it's also fundamentally kind of not a great way of evaluating your own self-worth. And this, I think, is really interesting. And I'm going to do a little cutaway because I think that this is a frequent concern in contemporary Japanese popular culture, right? You think about it in terms of body image and of, for want of a better term, complexes. And here is, I'm going to segue quickly into another Japanese band called Chai, and play you a little bit of that.
For everybody, do you have a body complex? So, I have many body complex. So, my eyes very small. This is lovely eyes. This is Neo cute. Neo kawaii. And my legs very short. This is lovely legs. This is Neo cute.
So it's interesting, right, that what they're talking about, body complexes, their attempt to reclaim cuteness in a more expanded way. This is what they mean by neo kawaii, right? But it's fascinating to me that the things that she talks about as being the source of her own anxiety are things which are expressly associated with the Japanese body, right? She talks about her eyes being too small and her legs being too short. And I think this is really interesting because it's exactly the same as the song that we're just talking about, where what we're fetishizing is the tallness of the guy and the breast size, the big boobs of the girl. None of these things, like the eyes and the legs, are Japanese body features, normal body features that are valorized within traditional Japanese culture. These are all Western imports, right? Standards of beauty that have been brought into Japan, and it's kind of painful and a source of these complexes because by definition these are standards of beauty like tallness and blue eyes and blonde hair and all that kind of stuff, which are not suited to the Japanese physical form, right? So the song is shot through by this idea that within youth culture, within general culture, we're fascinated, obsessed by things that we cannot be, things that we cannot have, right? And our sense of self-worth is determined by our failure to live up to standards that were never made with us in mind, right? And as the Chai video says, you know, that what neo kawaii is all about celebrating the charm of your own, what you actually are, rather than the extent to which you do or don't measure up to other kinds of standards of beauty. Now, to me, that's a punk idea, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment when we've got through the song lyrics about why I think of Atarashii Gakko as a punk band. And I know they don't sound conventionally like a punk band, but like Chai, I think that part of what makes them punk is a certain kind of attitude within their energy, their personality, and their lyric. したから自分愛せば探し物はこれですか私は変わらずそのままありがとう余計な嘘が真の相談待ったなしアニメは気づけば最終回またなるスマホの音うるさ Yeah. So, you know, the first thing that she says there is, you know, why don't, from tomorrow, why don't you start loving yourself? Is this what we're searching for, right? To try and find a way to celebrate what you are rather than what you wish you were, yeah? And she says, you know, she's been in the same situation, and then back to this section, this preoccupation with popular culture, right? She says the translation on the official translation says no waits on career path counseling, which I think it means no waiting for career path counseling. Realizing that it's already the anime's final episode. And I think, we can read that as saying, again, we're not looking into the future and planning for the future because we're conscious of the things that we value are already ending, right? And I think in that sense, she means both literally, the TV shows that you watch that are finishing and that takes priority. But also, I think more generally, the sense that we're in it's like you're in the anime, right? The things that you value are ending all around you. They're finishing around you. And you have to celebrate those things in the moment, in now, rather than anticipating the future and what fun you're going to have or what good things you're going to do down the line. You might never get that because you're already in the last episode. You might not know it, right? And I don't think that necessarily means, because, you might die or something, though it could mean that. I think it means when you're in school, in the ways that they are often talking about, or when you're in a job or any number of things, you're constantly saying, well, I don't have time for that stuff now. But in the future, when I retire, when I get a new job, when I move house, when I leave my parents' basement or whatever it is, that's when life's going to get good. For now, I just have to get through things. And part of what she's saying is, you gotta experience this now, right? And a lot of the stuff around you is just a distraction, like the smartphone that we are all welded to, right? That constantly, like the TikTok thing that she was referring to before, where our sense of excitement and fulfillment comes from a device which is about other people looking at us from the outside, and that finally doesn't matter. That's quite a moment to have frozen the video out, isn't it? She's awesome. Yeah, okay, so yes, smartphone, urasai. The thing with the box and the numbers and the desks is a lottery about who's going to sit where, right? So periodically in the Japanese classroom, things get moved around, things seasonally shift, and so on, and the seating arrangements change. So the conceit of the thing is that the girls are fascinated by who's going to get to sit next to the tall guy. But again, this is all part of the sort of the trivialness, the minor sort of stupidity of everyday life, and celebrating these little, fairly unimportant things. And again, of course, the chorus, with its preoccupation with nothingness, with not being able to find things, with being sort of lost and struggling, and that this is both the good and the bad of life, that you're trying to find your way through a maze of some sort. This other version, and I really like this because it really showcases the dancing in a really tight area, because the whole video is shot inside a train car, and we get to be sort of up close with them. Yeah, the peekaboo thing, right, that they keep doing with their hands, and this image of hiding yourself and revealing yourself is, I think, at the heart of the song, right? Because because it's also a song about trying to find yourself. So you're looking at the outside, but you're also conscious that selfhood is somehow being constructed, right, in the process. And the way that the chorus, Ashita Kawai, is it Ashita or Asuga? I forget. Both words mean tomorrow, being afraid of tomorrow, and Koi toka ai. These are both, koi and ai are both words for love. So, but the official translation is like or love, right? Being uncertain about the nature of, I don't know, your relationship or something like that. These are yet another source of anxiety and uncertainty within the sort of daily life of a young person. And here we do this sort of little breakdown where we slow it down. She's saying, you know, every night fed up with incomprehensible study, Tokyo. If there are native Japanese speakers who can address this, I'm a little confused by the spelling of Tokyo with an I. And I've asked around a little bit, and most of the Japanese people that I know are not actually young people in Japan at the moment. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty about what this means, because it's unusual to produce it like that as a 3-syllable word, right? As opposed to the usual Tokyo, meaning the place, the city. And the best explanation that I've heard so far is that Tokyo, spelt with in that kind of Romaji or katakana style, suggests the experience of living in Tokyo as a young person, right? And that being confronted by the difficulties, the overwhelming incomprehensibility of such a massive city. And that's what Tokyo means, that it's a source of constant study. Now, if that's wrong, I would be glad to hear comments clarifying it. I initially thought it was an acronym for something that people would study in school, but I couldn't find what it means. So I'm going with that, but if you've got a better idea, let me know. So yeah, she's talking about the difficulties of study and having to sort of constantly balance everything, comparing everything, and the 50 meters race. This is a feature of Japanese high school life, right? Certain sports thing that everybody has to do these sort of physical exercises and so on. And though she sort of skips through it and comes last because she's bad, but she enjoys the process of completing the race in a skipping fashion rather than competing against everybody else in the way that she's supposed to, which is interesting. And then, struggling to wake up in the morning and so on. And then we go back to this section about, again, the body image stuff. The other video, which is just their dance practice video, again, it gives you a slightly different flavor of what it is that they're doing. I love this because if you watch them closely, they're each doing something different, right? They're great at doing the synchronous stuff where they're all doing the same thing, but they all have different styles. And you can see, if you watch them closely, go back over it, that they're all performing in a slightly different mode, which is more of their own, right? And I think part of what makes this group work is the way that they sort of synthesize disparate elements, different talents and interests, and it manifests in the choreography. are in some ways one of the sort of least conventionally Japanese acts I've seen in a very, very long time. And part of it, the idea of young women singing about the things that they sing about, and taking the attitudes they do, and with this sort of fascinatingly unself-conscious attitude to things like body, right? They're having to sort of black out Suzuka because she's rolling around and her skirt's all over the place, and then the sort of ridiculous sort of cartoon breasts things that she does, which is a feature, incidentally, of her. When you see her doing interviews, if I can find any clips, and in particularly in her artwork, right, which is, she's a great visual artist, very sort of caricature, grotesque sort of thing, and there's a kind of a wonderful modernist, a lack of romanticism and a lack of eroticism in the way that she represents the body, right? And this is very unusual in Japanese pop, to be this sort of candid and frank about physicality. And as I say, it's not erotic. This is not supposed to be sexualized. Absolutely not. And if you're seeing that, that's your problem. Because I don't think that's what they're about at all. At all. This is about ownership. This is about claiming the fact of your body as something not to be embarrassed about. And it's kind of like the body image stuff that we were just talking about. That, the sort of the fascination with big boobs and stuff is a joke, right? That it's just bodies, and it's not mystical, and it's not something to be put on a pedestal or idolized. And this is escaping from a certain kind of dominant male perspective. Let's be honest, that's what it is, right? The way that women are frequently forced to view themselves because they're used to being seen through a male gaze. That's what I think's going on. I love that they're having a good time with it, Bye-bye. Yeah, this. One of the things I love about these sort of improv videos is that, you get to see what they can do when it's not all about camera angles and lighting and set and costume and all that sort of stuff. This is just raw ability and practice and skill. But it also gives you this sense that they're actually a sort of community, that they like each other and that they're working together in a collaborative fashion, and that collaboration is also the root of a lot of their creativity. And I think that's really interesting because it suggests that this is not simply a mass-produced group who's being given instructions from other people and being told what to do. That a lot of this seems to come from them. I have no idea how much, and maybe I'm overly optimistic about that, but it feels organic, It feels like something that they are doing themselves. That I thought of Atarashii Gakko as kind of a punk band, which I know that sounds a little perverse, but I want to talk a little bit about Japanese punk as a way of trying to justify that somewhat preposterous claim. Now, let me be clear, right, first. Part of what I like about Atarashii Gakko is their musical breadth, right? That, the song that we've just been talking about is a dance song with sort of rap components, got a hip-hop kind of feel, at least to parts of it. And, some of the other stuff is a different kind of dance music, more melodic. And if you look back into, stuff on their first two albums, there's a lot of jazz influence, a lot of swing, and some sort of straight up rock and roll, even some sort of metal elements here and there. And I love this. I part of what I really like about them is this breadth of musical tonality, right? And so I'm not saying that there's a punk sound, but I want to talk about. I mean, there is a little, but and you see it particularly in some of their live shows. There's a chaos and an energy to their live shows and the way they interact with the audience, which I think has a punk kind of sensibility. But let's talk a little bit about what punk is, particularly Japanese punk. And there's nowhere better to start than 1987, Blue Hearts. You may have heard this. I'm just going to a quick blast of it just so that you get the idea. And there are lyrics here. I don't know if you'll be able to read them. Yeah, it's so good, man. I mean, and this is sort of stripped down. Again, this is late 80s. It has a number of sort of Western punk roots, right? It's got some Clash, it's got some Ramones, it's got some New York Dolls, it's got a number of different sort of early punk bands built into it. And it got that really sort of stripped down rock and roll sound. But what makes it punk is the subject matter of the song as much as the performance, right? And the simplicity of the melody. That, you know, we're singing a love song about, you know, wanting to look like a brown rat, right? That's the first line, where and the idea that there is beauty in a brown rat, and it's not the kind of beauty that gets put into pictures, or to put it another way, it's not a beauty that gets commodified. It's not traditional cuteness, right? It is neo-cute, in a sense, right? Because you're valuing the beauty of the thing itself, right? Without any of the sort of social overlaying that, you know, the repulsion or negative feelings that we have from rats. That if you look at a rat in the right way, then it's a beautiful thing. That's a punk idea, you know. And to put it in the context of a relationship and wanting to be like that with another person, I think is kind of beautiful and strange, but basic, right? That I remember once being in Tokyo and reading a story about a brand new swanky hotel in downtown Tokyo, and somebody, you know, the first few days that the story, that the hotel opened, and somebody pressing the elevator, and the elevator doors opened, and there was a rat in the elevator. And there was something kind of glorious about the idea of this incredibly polished, beautiful building, and there's this rat that has somehow survived. And I love that because it's real, you know? That's life. That's not product. It's not the kind of again, commodified, packaged, polished beauty that we associate sometimes with kawaii culture and with, particularly with a lot of things that come out of mainstream Japan. Of course, comparatively old by punk standards. So let's have a quick look at something a bit more recent. This is D. Kelly Muff with Trash Beats from about 5 years ago. great stuff, isn't it? You know, and again, the sort of conventional kawaii image is there in the Mickey Mouse shirt, and then she opens her mouth and that sound comes out, and suddenly we're in an entirely different kind of musical world. And it's still got a lot of those roots in sort of straight up rock and roll, right? But there's that stripped down, aggressive quality. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that regardless of the sound, what punk is all about, finally, is about a kind of iconoclasm, right? It's about undermining or destroying images of what is considered standard, sacrosanct, right? This is a musical equivalent of knocking the heads off statues, right? That looking for something which is earthy and centered in the performer, in the voice, and there's no attempt to be conventionally pretty or marketable, you know? And I think, and that's the heart of punk, and that's what I think Atarashii Gakko are driven by. Let's try another. Up to date, this is a band you may have seen, made a lot of waves on Facebook last year, Sakuran Zansen, and this is the single that got them a lot of attention. It's called Taxi Cab, Taxi Rider, Taxi Driver, Taxi something, I forget, I'll check. And you've probably seen this, and immediately you look at them and you can see they've got this sort of Devo madness kind of presentation. It's still punk, but now it's the kind of punk which is a different kind of subversive because it's self-consciously playful and kind of over the top. You see what I'm saying?
走る40億下る頭で今夜全てが変わるよ東京中のペットショップを壊しに行かなくちゃ君の名前も僕の名前ももうとっくに忘れたよ Hey バイバイこれでバイバイ変な顔した人たち路肩でくだまる石ころ遠い昔の伝説を君は一生知らないで君は一生知らないで、ぶっ壊せ
It's great stuff, man. I really like these guys, and they have some of that chaotic, wild energy. Now, again, Atarashii Gakko are manifesting their subversion in a completely different way. And part of what I love about this is this sort of strange, contained wildness there, and one of the things about punk is that it quickly starts to morph into other things as it gets more polished, right? And there are elements, I think you can hear sort of the way that punk turns into new wave in bands like XTC, who I mentioned before, or even David Byrne and Talking Heads had this sort of very stagey but quirky quality to the way that they presented themselves, and I think you see that in this. One of the particular ways in which they sometimes manifest that quirkiness is an interesting, I don't know if it's a coincidental connection to Atarashii Gakko, but you'll see what I mean when I show you this next clip. I'm playing that same song that we just heard at a show last year in a small Tokyo venue where you can still see people are social distancing because of COVID. But pay attention to what he's wearing. So great. It's so strange, you know, but it's consciously, deliberately strange. That's why I made that reference to David Byrne. I think that some of that sort of performativity, I think, is quite deliberate. And we see he's wearing the sailor suit there, which is not unusual for them. There are other moments in which he does that as well. Hold on, let me pull one up. This is a song called Pills, which is about, you know, the sort of tediousness of a lot of rock and roll. play a lot of that, but the stuff is great. And again, what I'm saying is that, you know, a lot of what they're sort of undermining or poking fun at is a particular kind of mainstream culture, mainstream music, including themselves, right? That this is what punk is all about, that sort of deconstructing the way that we put people on pedestals as performers, and trying to get it to sort of come back down to basics. And punk is cyclical, right? You know, the first punk movement of the sort of late 70s that grew out of things like the New York Dolls, whose notion of subversion was, some of it was gendered, and a lot of it was about the sort of poking fun at and undermining the sort of the rock and roll culture which had developed some of the Beatles onwards, you know, into these big overblown rock bands, and everything slick and polished and glamorous, and they were trying to do something very different, and that feeds into the Sex Pistols, and so, you know, and the Ramones and the Clash and so on, but it keeps coming back, you know, periodically. You know, not only is punk cyclical, but its forms change, and you know, so long as it retains that kind of iconoclastic impulse to undermine a lot of what is already around it as the sort of standard, respected form, particularly of music, then whether it's, you know, speaking politically or aesthetically, what punk is about is that fundamental impulse to deconstruct the norm and to get people to think about things a little bit differently. And it's not necessarily about that sort of stripped down rock and roll sound. And, you know, you think about somebody like, well, even a band like the Smiths, you know, which are clearly not a punk band, but were evolving out of that sort of new wave scene to try and speak to ordinary experiences. That right? And the idea that most pop and rock is sort of slick and polished and big, and it doesn't actually speak to ordinary people in the way that they live. And so that's what those Morrissey lyrics are trying to do. Or think about somebody like Michael Stipe of REM in the, whatever it was, late 90s, when Automatic for the People was released, and he referred to that as a punk album. And he was being deliberately sort of perverse, but because in some ways it sounded a lot less like punk than the mainstream alternative music of the day, which was driven by, you know, grunge rock from Nirvana and Pearl Jam and, you know, Soundgarden and all those kind of bands that were around at the time. And then, you know, Automatic for the People comes out and it's beautiful and it's lyrical and it's piano driven, a lot of it. You know, it's songs like Everybody Hurts and Find the River and those kind of lovely songs. But for him, he was saying this is a punk album because it's trying to get back to something which is in opposition to mainstream music, right? And then, of course, there's that other form of punk which comes out of the same time with people like Green Day and Blink-182, which is a very suburban kind of punk, where we're talking about songs about, you know, growing up in a divorced family, or you know, issues with sexuality, but again, that same sort of sense that you're somehow an outsider, right? And that whatever is dominant doesn't speak for you, doesn't really get into your soul, and doesn't communicate who you are. And that's where I think these guys are coming from. So yeah, they're an art project, and they're a dance group, and they're an idol group. They're also a punk band. That's what I think. And maybe you think this is ridiculous and crazy. That's fine, whatever. But I think that all that sort of lyrical, unconventional stuff about being lost and being confused and being frustrated by the ordinary stuff of existence, and the things that we get distracted by, whether that's technology or the things that we're supposed to find sexually attractive, and it's all stupid, and none of it is finally about who we are. And that's a punk sentiment. For Atarashii Gakko, I think that punk influence is a lot of it is about their Japanese-ness and the way that they figure within Japanese pop culture, and being simultaneously part of it and kind of undermining a lot of what is fairly traditional in terms of Japanese society and art. And it does seem to me that, you know, with all these videos and things that they have done recently, and this, I'm sure a lot of this is coming through 88 Rising, that they have their eyes on a global market, and they're expanding. And it's interesting, some of the videos that they've been doing, which are specifically about Japan, and, you know, the Seishun Academy stuff, where they're showing you, you know, what it's like in schools, or why people go to shrines, and so on, you know, and it's interesting, and it seems to be sort of deliberately addressing the West and talking about Japan while simultaneously pushing back against certain elements of that same Japanese culture from which they're emerging, you know, taking it in a new and kind of international direction. Hence the video like this, which they released on the release of 999.
Hello! We are Atarashii Gakko! New song 999 released today! Nine! どこにもない！見つからない！あ、おっぱい大きいね！かっこいい！かわいい！Please listen to it a lot. We are looking forward to seeing you someday. Please continue to check us out. I love you. I love you. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and that's an interesting remark about hoping to see you soon. It would be really interesting to see if they can put together a US tour at some point, and what that would be like. It would be very small venues, which would be kind of cool. You know, I hope it would mean playing with a live band, which obviously they've done in the past, but sometimes that's just to backing tracks. Whether their audience is large enough for that, I don't know. We'll see. I really like these guys, and I think they're really interesting. I'm fascinated to see where they go. I don't know whether I will do more videos talking about their music. Kind of depends on whether people respond. The one that I did for Otonna Blue got a lot of views, actually more than most of the Baby Metal videos, which is interesting. But then when I did the Dokubana one, that not so many. So I don't know what that means. Maybe because that song is not as new and not as well known. I would like to sort of go back and talk about some of the songs off the first and second albums, while hoping, of course, that there's a third album in the works. We'll see. Anyway, so that's all I got. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe. I'm particularly interested in hearing from Japanese viewers in Japan, especially from younger fans of the band, not of me. I'm fully conscious that I don't have fans. That's okay. And I'm also particularly interested in hearing from female fans, because I think, you know, when this stuff gets exported to the West, too much of the fan base is male, and some of their interests are not simply in the music. I was torn about talking about this. This has been a rough week in the US, as you are probably aware, and, you know, anti-Asian racism is a real thing, and targeting Asian women because you assume that they are the objects of your sexual fantasy is a very troubling thing, and it makes me a little anxious about talking about these bands because I know that there's that element within the fan base. And I think it's really part of the reason that I chose to do this video today, having wondered about whether I wanted to keep doing things like this, because I don't want to feed that. But I think my way of trying to work against it is by saying, let's talk about these artists as artists. Let's talk about them as creative people who are using a high level of skill and talent to execute interesting ideas and fun songs, and not to turn them into the objects of desire, especially when the songs are so clearly not about that. So, yeah, I wasn't certain I was going to say that. But anyway, there it is. That's what I think. Yes, like, comment, subscribe, and if people want me to do more, I will do more. Thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.